So this is going to be a video for my Queen's Eye Tarot. All right. So I've yet to make a long form video for you as far as charming the smoke. All right. I find this to be relaxing as hell. All right. But it's more about the conversation being had than anything. All right. So that being said, I just watched your video about the factor of other people complaining of apparently why I'm not emotionally fucked up to the point of going ahead and killing myself over the malicious shit that they went to go put me through. All right? Ultimately, when you understand people's motives, you have to accept them where they're at, but that doesn't mean that you have to be willing to deal with them, you know? Like, I mean, for example, all right? One thing that had bothered me with the person that I was with when I was married, they were that whole situation, which ended up getting to find out it was a they were with me for the wrong reasons situation, you know? One of the things that had bothered them was the factor that when I was pissed off, or dealing with something emotionally with whether people that I'd been with in the past or conflicts with friends or family, that I'd go ahead and I'd make music about it, all right? That would help me emotionally regulate. All right. The factor that I needed to make music to emotionally regulate, that was the fucking problem. All right. And I mean, don't get me wrong. There are plenty of skills that I ended up getting from that. I'd learned how to do audio production. I had learned how to go ahead and formulate my thoughts in a way that I could just channel it, just boom, you know? And I mean, even to this day, musically, I'm proud of what the fuck I did, you know? And don't get me wrong, there are people that ended up getting pissed off, you know? And they wanted to go ahead and get at me, being like, oh, you're talking shit about me and everything. It's like, no, I wasn't talking shit about you. I was addressing a situation that involved you, all right? I didn't name your name. All right. If anyone put the pieces together of who specifically I was talking about, then great. You know? Ultimately, if you feel upset about that, I'm sorry you feel that way. All right. But me making that music was me going ahead and learning how to be able to emotionally temper myself. All right. It was me going ahead and choosing a alternative outlet of handling a situation, all right? A form of mediation, whether or not the other person was involved, simply for the factor of being able to know that whether I had to deal with that person again or not in the future, that I at least handled things emotionally on my end to go ahead and prevent from having to go ahead and rely on physical altercations to address situations of blatant disrespect, you know? Like, and it pisses some people off. And you know what? That's okay. People are going to feel how they feel, just like I felt how I felt. And that music was going ahead and addressing and encapsulating an emotion at a moment in time that I had so much bearing down on me in life that I needed a way to be able to handle it that wouldn't take my me problem, i.e., my emotional dysregulation, and turn it into a them problem. All right? And I understand it was a response to their action or inaction in some cases. But ultimately, the way that I felt was not their problem. Just like how I feel is not their problem. All right? The problem I started having, though, was people would go ahead and start doing shitty things to me in an attempt to go ahead and get me to make music about them. That was the point where I was like, all right, you know what? Fuck it. Fuck you. Fuck it all. All right? Even like, ultimately, the person that I was ready to settle down with, they felt slighted by the factor that I wouldn't end up going ahead and writing them a track about how much I love them or how I'm head over heels for them. And you know what the sad factor about that is? Ultimately, they would have seen it as a proclamation of professing my feelings from the mountaintops. It wasn't enough that I would have rather gone and not made music, not put our music out there, like not put our business out there, and instead of going ahead and making a track to profess my undying loyalty and devotion, actually just embrace the time we had together and actually enjoy the factor of each other's company. You know? Actually feel the moment rather than have to be like, hold on, we need to put a pause on feeling the moment to go ahead and tell everybody exactly how I'm feeling. Which ultimately they would have gotten to probably end up with their feelings hurt even worse if I would have done that, because the response from the internet in that situation would have simply been, we don't care. That's your business. That's your feelings. Glad something's going right for you. We're living our fucking lives. And would have left them a hell of a lot more disappointed than they would have been had the track never got made in the first place. But people don't think about that. Like, nobody wants to think about that when in that situation. You know? And instead, it's like one of those, oh, clearly you don't love me enough to go ahead and make a track about me, despite the fact that you've made a track about other people that you've been with in the past. And it's like, hey, and guess what? Those ended up turning into a complete and total dumpster fire, because ultimately all it did was give them a grandiose sense of, delusions of grandeur. All right? Ultimately, it just made them, it inflated their ego, and ultimately, it stopped being about me and them and the feelings shared between each other and what we shared and had with each other, and more about the way that I would make them feel by utilizing my creative abilities to go ahead and help them perceive themselves in a way that they had a difficulty being able to perceive themselves, you know, in a better light, in a light that, hey, there are things that are good about you. Like, there are things worth loving. There are things worth cherishing. Even with the negative traits that you end up having, there's also so much good you bring to the table. And I value that and I cherish that. And the more that I'd go ahead and make music that would end up going ahead and referencing them, the less those positive traits would end up being there because they wouldn't nurture them. It would all then be a sense of validation of, all right, well, if you're not going ahead and dedicating this amount of time towards, you know, making me feel special with the music that you end up making, then ultimately, clearly you don't love me as much as you used to love me. And it's like, why are you taking your sense of worth off of my creative ability to go ahead and verbalize and express the depth of the feelings that I have for you? You know? And unless those positive traits would end up getting encapsulated, the more it would end up being like, wow, now you're just putting me at an emotional deficit that I don't see you being able to actually replenish. So we're clearly everything's ran its course. You know, some people are in your life for a season, some people are in your life for a reason. You taught me a lesson. Clearly I need to go ahead and learn it. I could apply it in the future with other situations. And I just gotta accept it's life, you know? Not everything ends for a negative reason either. I mean, sometimes relationships fall apart because people have to geographically relocate, and, not everybody's capable of being able to do a long distance relationship. When I was younger, I was capable of it. Nowadays, it's like, no, I'm not gonna fucking, ultimately, I'm not gonna go ahead and wait around until you feel like the time is perfect and immaculate for everything to work out. Either it's going to work out or it's not going to work out. And if it's not going to work out, hey, it happens. You know? Not every story has a happy ending. But apparently, going ahead and embracing a realistic perspective ends up going ahead and having it perceived, oh no, emotionally you're emotionally devoid, or clearly you're hanging on to remnants of feelings from the past. No, no, I understand that the things that didn't work out in the past ended up not working out because either A, it would have prevented me from being able to eventually end up with what ends up being right for me. Notice I didn't say who ends up being right for me. I said what ends up being right for me. All right? Because ultimately, what's right for somebody isn't always come along with, second person. Sometimes people end up realizing the factor that they thrive that much better alone. Some people end up getting to realize that ultimately the biggest kneecap and deficit that they ended up dealing with was the factor of having to go ahead and, you know, stop to go ahead and give somebody emotional reassurance that they should have been capable of being able to give themselves, you know, or having to go ahead and, rework the way that they would end up going ahead and living their life based around the perspective, the way that somebody else ends up going ahead and perceiving, no, this is the way that things should be. And it's like, okay, so if you're going to go ahead and be a perfectionist that wants to just nitpick me into oblivion, you see that much bad, you see that much not worth nurturing, then go. Just go. And then people end up going ahead and having a hard time and getting upset about the factor of like, why are you not feeling like, you'd end up dying without me, or you can't picture life without me? Hey, guess what? Before we met, I had a pulse. I was capable of breathing. I lived. Once upon a time, there was a life that I never knew you. And guess what? After we're done, after our roads no longer ended up merging, if there's a life without you, guess what? It is what it is. It's not like I didn't know that there was life without you. There was a point in time I didn't know you existed. And guess what? When we're done, when everything's all said and done, we're over, all T's crossed and I's dotted, that's just what it goes back to. You know? And I mean, it's fucked up the amount of people that end up going ahead and getting insulted by that. But meantime, life goes on, you know? Not to mention that, but people change. Like, people don't always end up staying the same, and realistically, staying the same isn't necessarily a good thing. Alright? Like, I mean, if people didn't change, ultimately, nobody would have ever learned how to walk. It would be expected that they'd still be crawling on their hands and knees, just like, before they were capable of being able to take their first steps. You know? Ultimately, you'd have people not knowing how to be able to, use the toilet, be able to wipe their ass. Because, there was nobody that knew how to be able to do that to help them, maintain hygiene. You see my point here on that? Like, don't get me wrong, things end up happening in people's lives too that they end up having to go ahead and relearn that shit. I know firsthand, because, after the coma, and after you know, the factor that they ended up having to go ahead and surgically put in catheters to go ahead, and, you know, release waste when the dismemberment happened. Yeah. Ultimately, that ended up going ahead and affecting the muscles in the dick basically. That ends up going ahead and causing sometimes for urination to end up happening because the muscles, after being severed completely from the body, aren't going to end up going ahead and having as strong as a bond, to the actual base of those same muscles that they ended up having to get surgically reattached to, and be able to make a complete seal. So, I mean, ultimately, that's not going to be the same ever, you know? It's kind of the same thing, like, ultimately, before women end up having kids and, you know, they're able to go ahead and no problem not pissing themselves, But then after they end up having kids, because the way the whole birthing process ends up going, those muscles end up going ahead and not being the same, and then, you know, they end up going ahead and envying, the form of themselves before they had kids, all because of the factor of, hey, I remember when I was able to go ahead and cough or laugh really loud without risk of going ahead and pissing myself. Like, these things happen, you know? It's a matter about how much people go ahead and accept them. There's so much that end up being out of people's control that they make it so much of an issue up by the factor of how the lengths that they'd be willing to go to try to gain control over factors that shouldn't be in their control in the first place. You know? Like, I mean, with the smoke thing, alright? The incense. When I'm going ahead and talking, I'm enjoying the smell of the incense even when I'm not, just waving it around. So, when I'm just going ahead and just letting it burn, people are like, well, why aren't you trying the smoke on that one? because I'm enjoying the fragrance of it. I'm going ahead and giving myself a sensory pleasure, you know? Not harmful to my health. Quite literally just a aromatic pleasure, you know? Sometimes it doesn't need to be that fucking deep, you know? Well, with the incense, it's a waste of money. Alright, $3 for 10 incense. Alright? Ultimately, 10 incense, literally the price that I pay for a pack of cigarettes. Alright? And ultimately, when I end up going ahead and using those incense to be able to do tricks with the smoke, and I put it online and people end up liking to see it online, they get a visual sensory pleasure. And for me, I get a visual sensory pleasure and a aromatic sensory pleasure, you know? So it does end up going ahead and being symbiotic in its own way. People find it to be either a waste of money or a waste of time. It's like, hey, guess what? It makes me feel good. And for the people watching, it helps them go ahead and nurture a sense of imagination that a lot of people haven't tapped into since they were a kid. Because they've just gotten so drained of the the things that make the wonders of life worth it, that makes life worth living, and ended up having to go ahead and feel like they had to leave it in the past because they're so overburdened by responsibilities and all the concerns that life on life's terms end up going ahead and piling on them. I mean, shit. Whatever happened to that saying, it's the simple things in life. But apparently if I go ahead and I talk about that, either, oh, you're being fake woke, or you're trying to be perceived as being a lot smarter than you really are. No. I've just taken in as much information as possible. I've perceived as much about everything that I could, including my own life, from both an outside perspective as well as trying to go ahead and trying to internalize it from the perspective of all parties involved. To try to go ahead and see why people feel the way that they end up feeling, and if the emotional response ended up going ahead and truly conflating to the level of being reasonable or rational, or if ultimately there was a circumstance of either minimizing or catastrophizing. You know? Like, I'm sorry that people don't end up going ahead and being as analytical as I tend to be. But you know what? They are who they are. I am who I am. I mean, sometimes people just need to stop going ahead and trying to make everything such a big fucking deal. But hey, that's just my opinion. Everyone's got one.